Ryan Morris. Always enjoy talking to Ryan, and I've known him for a while now, and just really experienced, intelligent man. Knows the, technology vendor space and service provider space extremely well. Has great experience in that. Worked for some of the biggest firms, working what we call in the channel with service providers. Just very savvy on small businesses and just getting over that hump of being a small business and scaling up. Really enjoy my conversations with Ryan. We're doing a lot of work together. He's got two great podcasts, one called Killing It's short for IT. He does it with Dave Sobel and Carl Polishek, which is excellent. That's weekly. He has another one on IoT. IOTA. It's very good as well. But I really enjoy talking with Ryan Morris, and I know you will like it as well. Thanks for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic, I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business that lasted over 25 years? Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. Ryan Morris, thank you so much for doing this. What is the well, I know we kind of focus on managed service providers, but I think even if we extend it to small to medium businesses, what are some of the common mistakes that you see by the business owners of MSPs and small business owners?
I think it's interesting. There's for years and years, I grew up in the technology industry, and I grew up working first for vendors and then for very small businesses, and then kind of working in the vendor, distributor, and solution provider layers for years and years. As we learned working way back, right? Like on the big vendor side, you might have a household name for a logo. You might have tens of thousands of employees, billions and billions of dollars of revenue, and you just assume that business works the way that business works.
Hmm.
But when you sell through the channel and you realize that there are just some fundamental operating things that are just not true at small businesses, especially when it's like you and me and a couple of friends, and you got the front office, I got the back office, off we go, right? Like almost all the time there are systems and processes that are taken completely for granted in large organizations that small businesses just completely forget about, right? And I learned a long time ago, nobody just organically remembers any of this stuff. You have to have it written down in a process, in a policy, and that's the only way any of this stuff actually gets done. In order to make that happen,
Hmm.
though, people look at it and go, oh, 10,000 processes. It's going to be so hard. Like writing the financial section of my business plan, oh, it takes forever, right? And so they just don't start. And what I find, in in any small business, but especially in small businesses that are run in a very complex technology oriented world, very smart people make the assumption that I don't need to do all that homework. I'll figure it out as I go, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but years and years ago, somebody said to me in a meeting one time, and I've lived by this assumption ever since then. We're like, okay, when you think about people in the technology industry, there's a certain minimum requirement for intellectual horsepower,
Hmm.
right? And the way he said it to me was, dummies need not apply. Right? Like this is a hard business and the things we sell are super complicated and you have to be able to explain that to people. So you can't not be basically smart and do what we do for a living.
Mm.
Well, the hardest thing you'll ever do is convince smart people that they need to do the basic 101 level remedial stuff. They're
Hmm.
like, come on, man. I'm a bona fide rocket scientist. I've got all this stuff. It's fine. They just don't write things down. They don't have a process. And therefore, A, they forget things that are easy along the way. And B, they just overlook basic things about running a business. And then later on, when that comes up, they're like, "Oh, you're right. I probably should have figured that out."
Hmm.
It's not a crime. It's not because they're not smart, right? Like that. That you have to have a certain amount of brains to do technology, and you have to have a certain amount of entrepreneurial capability to start and run a small business. But there's a lot of details in between that make a lot of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I think oftentimes in our industry, we see like technologists lead companies, and they're not necessarily business people. And so, like you said, when you don't have those kinds of SOPs and in order, standard operating procedures, they kind of fall back and they could wing it. Pretty much, they do when they're solving a technical challenge. I've had something similar to this. We'll solve it, and we'll just kind of use
Mhm.
that same process for everything. Doesn't work.
Well, and that's the thing. It the what the reason it goes wrong is that they are successful for a while doing
Mm,
it that way,
mm,
right? Like, not every business succeeds, and we all know the statistics that every year 50% of new small businesses close before their first anniversary, and another 50% close before their fifth anniversary, right? Like, so the just raw statistics, it's 1 out of 4 that can be a lasting business. Well, if you're 2, 3, 4 years into this enterprise and you've been figuring it out as you go and you've been making money all along, well, A, you're a smart person, and B, you're a business person, and C, it's been working for 4 years.
right.
Come on. Why do I need to change anything? Well, that's usually where the hard lessons come from is, it's not because this is the first time they've dealt with it, it's because they winged it for years and it was fine. And now that thing goes wrong. And also, by the way, the undercurrent of all this conversation is, even if you are that smart and you are that capable of winging it and keeping all the plates spinning, that doesn't scale. And
Mm,
there's there the biggest complaint that I hear from small business people is, I just can't find people to hire. And I'm
mm,
like, well, even before this year, when that's a big challenge for
right.
everyone, right? Um, that's always been an issue. And small business people, I just can't find anybody to hire. And when you get inside of that, what you learn is it's not because there's no people, it's because they can't find somebody who does what they do
Right.
at the level they do it and is equally capable of figuring it out as you go. And my observation to that has always been, well, if these people were independent and they were intelligent and they were risk tolerant enough to just go into a complicated situation and figure it out and do that for money, you know what they would do? They'd start their own company.
Mm,
Like, they're not here to work for you or for me. If you're going to hire somebody to do what you do, then by definition it needs to be written down. And otherwise, what we hear from everybody is, oh, I'm just looking for that one perfect sales leader, that
right.
one perfect sales rep, that one tech leader who can run my service department and doesn't need me to spell it out, define every process, train them, mentor them, right? Actually make them capable. I just want to hire a really smart person who's just like me. I'm just looking
Mm,
for a clone of me. And then I'll just put them in their spot and go, dude, I'm overwhelmed. You need to just dive in and go. Well, that criteria, by definition, those people are rare, they are expensive,
mm,
and you're going to wait years to find anybody who, even if they were that good, they'd be way less likely to work for somebody else.
sure.
So we uh, we have spent years and years counseling small business people on, you know, don't look for rocket scientists to replicate what you do, define your process, and then look for people with functional skills who can step in and do the thing you need them to do without requiring them to also be like bona fide business geniuses.
Yeah, I agree. Isn't it also an issue? I kind of see two main points here. One is an issue of delegation, and the other is thinking that employees are going to treat their job like owners. It's very two distinct skill sets, or is a skill set
Oh yeah.
and a mentality that needs to change.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Many years ago, I started saying to people, when you're the where you're dealing with, we spend a lot of time for whatever reason, just organically, we get pulled in on sales compensation planning conversations.
Mm,
Technical people, by definition, are not necessarily familiar with the dynamics of how to motivate and reward a salesperson, right? Like,
right,
if I'm a technical person, I just tend to say, well, give me a base salary that rewards me for what I do. I'll do it as good as I can.
right,
And then give me a bonus at the end of the year if I'm really good at it, right? That's not how sales animals function,
right.
and so there's a there's a great deal of misunderstanding and a lot of complicated details that go into it. It doesn't have to be hard, but there are details that need to be calculated. And when people ask about it, I've always said, if you are the owner, the only thing you care about is revenue minus cost of goods equals gross margin, dot, 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 right? Like
Mm,
you live and breathe your P&L stack. And if you are not the owner, then the best way to get ahead in this world is to think like the owner thinks,
mm.
and to think about revenue minus cost of goods equals gross margin, right? Like that's the advice that we give people, but that's not organic. It's there are many people there. Let's put it this way: there are enough people in the world who are that smart and that conscientious that we assume everybody will be,
Mm.
and that's just not true. Like it's not a question of capability; it's just a question of internal motivation and the way that they approach their things. And if people approach their gig with an owner's mentality, lots of important things can be glossed over and we'll just figure it out. But when you get to 5 people, 10 people, 25 people, 100 people, the fact that, to assume that you're going to bat 1,000 in hiring people who have an owner's mentality and are unflaggingly conscientious about your business's best interest, like if you
Mm.
could figure out how to recruit that way, that should be your job. Because none of us have figured out how to be that consistent with hiring people who really invest themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I remember when we were growing, I started my MSP back in the 90s. We acquired some companies and all of a sudden we're, almost 30 employees and this whole level of like middle management had to, be introduced, which I was completely unfamiliar with and not prepared. So I should have, taken a step back and try to understand it a little bit, but we didn't, and several things happened. The crash of 2007 happened, but that's another issue. But so I mean, when you're working with business owners like that, and you have to explain to them, the business ramifications of what they're doing. I mean, again, they'll come back and say, "Hey, I've been doing this for 5 years. I never missed a payroll. I know what I'm doing. I'm getting paid a decent amount." and they're just not ready to scale. It's just a horrible
Well,
thing.
and that's the thing, right? Logically, it all makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, it all makes sense in logic. There's a layer of business that you can explain in a spreadsheet that it covers about 90% of the functional attributes of a business, right? I
Mm,
can define my accounting stack, I can define my processes around sales and customer engagement, I can define technical operations, I can define almost everything we do
hmm,
in very cold black and white terms, right? Like things that fit into a spreadsheet. And then there's this other side that is the human attribute, and one of the lessons I learned a long time ago: it does not matter how smart we are, it does not matter how vibrant our market is or how compelling our own business model is. If the humans who show up every day to do the stuff don't want to,
hmm,
then it doesn't matter how smart you are or how strong your offering is or how profitable your business model might be, right? Like you got into managed services like way back when I was doing it, right?
hmm,
It was before the terminology came
hmm.
around. We all looked at it and said, contract recurring revenue is way more attractive than this, saw blade of up and down and up and down. No, nobody who ever ran a services business enjoyed the ups and downs of projects or of the uncertainty of time and materials, right? We all did it that way because we didn't know differently, and we
Right.
all suffered with that. But there was a time where just organically you were like, if I could get you to sign a retainer like lawyers do, my life would be better. I would pay more attention to you. I would be more proactive. You just sort of organically
Hmm,
figure that stuff out. Well, there was an entire generation of people who became convinced, well, you're right. The business model naturally aligns the interest of the service provider and the interest of the customer. It's more forecastable. It's more automatable. It's more repeatable. You can make higher margins in that business model than you can in another business model. Done. Right? Like,
right.
okay, cool. So I figured it out. Therefore, the business model fixes everything. And I don't have to worry about all of the other stuff.
Hmm,
Yeah, except that anybody who's ever run an MSP knows the process and tools and technology, that's not the hard part. Like it's did that guy show up? Was
hmm,
he did he want to be here today? Was he professional and supportive and valuable to the customer when he talked to them, or was he an angry little troll who was pissed at you for something or pissed at the world for something and therefore gave bad service, and then you lost a trusted customer and a long-term contract commitment, and you're like, what in the world happened? I thought that managed services fixed it all. Well, still have to pay attention to the humans.
you do. You do. Ultimately, small businesses, MSPs are in the business of people. I mean, we have to work with people. We have to hire people. We have to motivate them. We have to, uh, nothing else is going to get solved. Tell me about your beginnings, Ryan. You mentioned you were in the managed services in the beginning. Talk me a little bit about that, please. How'd you get your start?
Sure. Well, yeah, if you go way back, my first jobs in the industry, I worked for big vendors in
Hmm.
marketing, and then one day, I was doing marketing campaigns into what we would now refer to as DMR partners, right? The big catalog resellers back in the day, right? And I was running marketing campaigns to sell through those reseller partners, and
Hmm.
one day I got called in on my performance review, and they were like, you're doing great. This is awesome. You know how you could do even better in our business is if you like actually were responsible for the revenue that came through that, and if you didn't just do the marketing but you owned that account and you were responsible for the revenue, wouldn't that be great? And I thought that sounded awesome. And it wasn't until I was back at my desk like a half an hour after the meeting that I was like, dude, I just got given a quota. Like, I
Ah.
just got put in sales and I didn't even know that's what was going to happen. That was kind of the beginning, right? And so
Hmm.
did channel sales for vendors in the industry as my first gig. But what you figure out in that process is the mechanics of go to market and just how much your personal performance depends on whether people who do not work for you voluntarily choose to do the thing that will achieve your objectives.
Hmm.
And if you once you figure that out, then you start to become really concerned about like, okay, so that guy over there, if he chooses to do the thing I need him to do, I will be successful this quarter. So what does that person want? Right? Like
Mm.
I became a student of psychology and business many, many years ago. And so I went from working for large vendors to working for distributors, and then actually was out for about a decade working on the agency and service provider side, right? Like we were born as an ad agency, but we very quickly learned, my business partner and I, both of us were born and raised in the vendor side of the technology community, and we
Mm.
both had been responsible for channel programs and channel sales. And so very early on, that became our distinctive position in the market, right? We were an ad agency that became a marketing firm that had an ad agency back end on it.
Hmm.
And but our positioning was all technology, all channel, all the time. That was the only thing that we did. And so we were you know, we were at a time we were still very small as a business in the agency world goes, but we were the only pure play channel agency back in the '90s, and so we did a lot of really cool stuff. Worked with very large organizations, and it gave us access to some of the inner workings of the industry. And then I went from there, and I actually ran the consulting practice and the training and education practice at iPad, which if people aren't familiar with kind of the former iterations of what was the world of CRN and VAR business, and it became the channel company. And IPED is the Institute for Partner Education and Development, the four-letter acronym, not three, right? And we were the industry analysts. We were the ones who did the research and the rankings and all of the understanding of what was happening, vendors, distributors, and solution providers in that whole channel mechanics. And so I was fortunate enough to have access to all the data that you can possibly imagine, inside the inner workings of every significant vendor channel program in the industry. And then, somewhere deep in that analytical process, what I realized was, you know you could have the very best product in the entire industry. You could build the very best channel program in the industry. You could have all of the coverage and all of the resources and still not sell anything unless you could get across the aisle inside that solution provider channel
Hmm.
and start to understand who they are and how they think and how they operate and how they make money. And it became my like kind of Johnny Appleseed quest, right? Like
Wow.
I was focused on, okay, so you're a vendor and your job is build cool products and sell billions of dollars of them. None of that happens unless that guy over there who does, 1.5 million or 2.5 million in total top line revenue as a reseller or as an integrator or as a managed service provider, if that guy doesn't wake up every day and go, you know what I would want to do? Out of 100 things I could choose to do with my time, I voluntarily prefer to go out and sell your stuff to my customers because it will solve their problem and make me money in the process.
Hmm.
And there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding and disconnection in our industry among those camps of players in the value chain. And I realized doesn't matter how cool your product is, does not matter how robust your channel program is. If a human can't connect with a human and come to an agreement that, you know what, this is actually good for you and it's good for me. Let's be in business together.
Mm.
If you can't do that, with replication at scale, our industry is littered with examples of phenomenal technology products that used to dominate the industry and then they just went away.
Right.
And everybody scratches their head and goes, I wonder why that is. Like you and I grew up in the world of, infrastructure, right? Like, the network world. Way back when there was this business called Novell.
Yes.
And boy, they invented local area network
Yeah.
protocols and they invented the channel medallion programs, right? Like you had to pay as a reseller, you had to pay cash money in the thousands and thousands of dollars for the right to apply to their program and then pass a test and become accredited as an integrator or a reseller in the Novell world. They had at one point in the 90s, early 90s, I would wager they had 85, 90% market share in the
Yeah.
network operating system
Yeah.
and network infrastructure business. And now they don't.
All right.
And everybody goes, yeah, I remember that good old fashioned business. I wonder what happened. And if you get inside of it, well, what's reasonable to assume is they didn't stop making good technology. There was never a day where somebody inside the leadership of Novell said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make crappy software.
Mm.
Like that never happened. They made industry leading software. They continued to make industry leading software. But they went from 85, 90% market share to, by the way, it's interesting for everybody to note, they are actually still in business, right?
Really?
Like Novell's
Mm.
still out there. They're still, yeah, they're still a company, right? Um, but they are a tiny fraction of a shadow of their former market dominance. And if you get inside of what happened, well, there was a day where the leadership at Novell said, you know what, I'm really unhappy with resellers in my program who sign up a customer and then make money maintaining those customer relationships and providing services. What I really need them to do is to stop making money on their existing install based customer relationships and start making money on reselling more of my gear and more of my software.
Hmm.
And so they re architected their channel program to basically just eviscerate any margins you could make on your existing install base and all of your opportunity and all of your medallion status and your margin opportunities. Everything went to new product sales.
Hmm.
And then there were these guys over at Microsoft who were like, we got this network operating system software that, originally it had 5%, 10%, 15% market share. And back then, nobody in the industry would have suggested that Microsoft's network operating system was superior to Novell's.
That's right.
Nobody. That was not what their role was. Their role was to go to their universe of hundreds of thousands of reseller partners and say to them, we got this tool over here, and over there you have customers who are, in the phenomenon of internet connections and the standardization of everything internally and externally on network protocols. When with that market dynamic happening and the phenomenal land grab of opportunity that was going on, Microsoft came out and said, you could sell their stuff and make 5, 10, 12 points of margin. Or you could come over here and not only can you make big, heavy margins on my network platforms, but we'll train and certify you to provide all the services on top of that stuff. And we love channel partners,
Mm.
right? Like if you go back to the 90s, if you heard from Microsoft, they said, we got good technology. We can meet all of your customers' expectations, but we love channel partners.
Mm.
And if you just diagnose it on that context, you can trace the direct line of changing market shares, and an entire industry was disrupted, not based on the functionality of the product, but based entirely on Microsoft looking out there and going, I can't hire 150,000 technicians. I can't possibly have FaceTime and direct customer support relationships with tens of millions of SMBs, it just literally can't happen. I can't go there. The only way I can get market coverage is independent resellers. And the only way they're going to do this is that they have to believe that I love them and I'm
Mm.
here to support them and make them successful. Ta-da. Like it worked. And when you realize that that is the story of our industry, no matter how big the enterprise class providers are, right? Cisco, Oracle, EMC. You look at all of these bellwether players at the industry leadership level, whether they were born in the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, those phenomenally large industry leading companies, every single one of them, even if they were born and built to billions of dollars on direct sales, as soon as somebody said, we got to get outside of the Fortune 500 and start doing the mid market. And have you guys seen how much opportunity there is for our stuff at the
Mm.
SMB level? Man, we should go after those SMB people. I wonder how you do that. And, many things transpire and they come out the other side as channel centric companies.
Yeah. I remember the early 90s. I would travel to those Microsoft shows and, they loved us. My goodness. They had people come to the office and they'd send us boxes every month. I mean, it was the first kind of, I'm a Microsoft partner. Wow. I get to put this on everything that we do. And it was just a dramatic change in everything that we did. And we just drank the Kool-Aid. It was amazing the way they opened up their arms for us. It was wonderful.
Oh yeah.
It was absolutely wonderful.
And that's the thing, right? You didn't do that because yeah, you didn't do that because they were, like benchmark studies that showed that their technology blew away everything else on the market.
Right.
You saw they had phenomenal global coverage, they had a massive marketing machine, and then they embraced you, called you a champion, called you a business partner.
Mm.
They embraced you. Well, the singular genius of their business, what made them as dominant in every technology that they ever became dominant in, is that they stopped and said, whatever it is it compatible with channel business models?
Hmm.
And you can go back some of the leadership that ran Microsoft's channel organization back in the day, right? Back in the 90s and in the 2000s. You look at some of those people and they are, well, they became titans of industry. They're like names that right? And the people who worked staff positions back then
Hmm.
are the executive VP XYZ that are running the industry now. Like there, if you go back and diagnose who all the people are in our industry, and you figure out like where did they come from. I'm a football fan, and so I've lived a lifetime of the Bill Parcells coaching tree and the
Mm.
the Bill Belichick coaching tree, and
Mm.
it's like you get whether it was the Cowboys universe or the 49ers or the Giants, or you saw where all the coaches today, you trace back their lineage and they came from somewhere.
Right.
Okay, do the same thing in our industry,
Interesting.
and you will find almost everybody that runs our industry now, you trace them back, and they went back to Microsoft, to IBM. They went back to some of the precursor companies that were acquired and subsumed, but they came from HP. They came from
Mm.
those places, and they run the world.
Hmm.
Well, there's a reason that they were successful, and it's not an accident. And yet, trillions of dollars of volume and transaction flows through our industry because small, independent, local companies who don't write down processes and don't understand human resources and aren't necessarily good at bookkeeping, right? Like those companies drive the future of our industry. Well, again, the biggest mistakes any of these vendors make is when somebody gets promoted to this new position of power and they become convinced that they know all the answers,
Mm.
and all the answers are counted in billions. And it's like, dude, I get that that's what your budget is. I understand that's your quota. You make it 50K at a time, 5K at a time, 2,500 at a time
Mm.
in transactions that are booked through tens, if not hundreds of thousands of independent solution providers. If you're in our business, whether you are an engineer or a marketer or a salesperson or just a finance professional, whatever you are, if you are in technology, you must be a student of small business.
Very true. And then I don't want to. You kind of have the opposite, where we had in the '90s. You had all these white box builders, that would got completely wiped out from Dell Direct. All that work that they were doing with white boxes, all of a sudden they couldn't do anymore because businesses and
Mm-hmm,
people were going onto the Dell website and just ordering stuff themselves. Kind of the opposite of channel,
mm-hmm.
And so we have this, some companies
Yeah.
completely
Well,
reaching out to us.
and there's
Yeah.
there's a pendulum of
Go ahead.
yeah. Oh no, I was just going to say there's a pendulum in business that it's all channel, it's all direct, it's all channel,
Mm,
and
mm,
it's based on inefficiencies, right? If selling direct cannot reach down into the mid market and SMB, you will embrace a channel strategy. But as soon as you embrace a channel strategy, I mean, again, everybody who's ever done this stuff knows just because you can call me an MSP and you a systems integrator and somebody else a VAR, there's categories that comprise hundreds of thousands of independent companies. That does not mean any two of them are remotely similar, right?
mm,
Small businesses are unique. They are independent. They are based on me and you and our quirks, right? Now we can all standardize and we can all learn best practice, but managing hundreds of thousands of partners at a global scale is incredibly inefficient.
mm,
Well, okay, as soon as that's the way of the world, you can swing the pendulum back on efficiency the other direction and go, you could deal with 10,000 independent solution providers, or you just put up one magic website.
hmm,
And things swung back over to Dell. And then eventually you can go back to those same customers and go, you could get that same generic box that does almost what you need, or you could get a custom configuration specified by somebody local who understands who you are and what you need. And we're not just going to sell you a box. We're going to solve your problem, and we can do it with intimate understanding of your unique requirements. And right now, the way you compete against Dell, well, I mean, we learned this a decade ago, right? You don't compete against Dell by being bigger and more efficient and have lower prices. You compete against Dell by saying, you are totally right. That box is cheaper.
hmm.
Maybe it'll work for you. Good luck. Let me know how it works.
Wow.
and and if it doesn't work and you call Dell and you spend the next 16 days on hold waiting for some person of a low skill level in a 1-800 call center to try to solve your very complicated technology problems, eventually you're going to come back over here and go, it costs 10%, 20%, 30% more to work with you, but it hurts less and
Mm,
it actually solves my problems. So I'm going to pay extra to get what I actually need. And, my time and my frustration are worth money.
mm. Yeah, very, very well said. On the podcast, Ryan, we talk. I always bring up discipline. As you know, I lost a lot of weight. People ask me how I do it, how I did it, and I say discipline. Or being a business owner for 30 years, re- you know, requires a certain amount of discipline. I wonder, how do you consider yourself a disciplined person? Did I lose you?
Oops, there you are. Again, I lost you there for a second. So hopefully you can go
No.
back in and edit that little chunk out.
Yeah, no, no, no problem. I'll make a note at the time. On the podcast, we bring up discipline, right? I lost a lot of weight. People ask me how I did it, like some magic, secret. I said, discipline. I've certainly had a business. I wouldn't consider myself 100% disciplined, but at some things I am. I wonder how discipline plays a role in your life, Ryan.
You know what? I think you are at the very heart of the issue. It, there's um, there was a book that I read many years ago that I go back to often, and I think it contains the answers to the mysteries of the universe in business. And the book was called Strategy and the Fat Smoker, and it was written by a British guy who I think is very, very intelligent. He's kind of a curmudgeon of a dude, right? But he has a very keen understanding of the operating complexities of professional services and technology organizations. And he wrote this book, and basically the secret in his book is contained in the title, right? What he said was, if I am that person and I go to my doctor and I say, dude, I'm struggling, I'm having a hard time, my health is bad, my weight is bad, I don't feel well all the time, what should I do? And he will look at me and he will say, well, you should eat less, exercise more, and stop smoking. And you go, okay, cool, thanks, but I'm looking for the magic answer, right? and and the essential premise of the book is that strategy is not difficult. In fact, in most cases, what needs to be done is obvious but difficult.
Hmm.
And the only difference between the people who thrive and the people who don't in that scenario or in other business contexts, we all know what the answer is. It's just that some people have better discipline at being focused and invested and continuous in the way that they apply those strategies, right? Like, I mean, I look at it when we engage with solution providers in consulting gigs, or when we do the very same thing with billion-dollar vendor organizations. In the very beginning, I always do a health status assessment, right? Like the very first thing we're going to do is to say, okay, in order for your business, in order for your entity to operate effectively, there are 5 functional systems in your business, right? You think of it from a human health perspective, there's circulatory, respiratory, musculatory, right? Like there are
Hmm.
systems that are at, whether you're tall, short, male, female, I don't care. Every human is built of the same functional operating systems. So are businesses. There is your connection to and alignment to the market. There is your ability to produce and deliver something of unique value. There is your ability to run and operate a business. There is your ability to find and engage customers. And then there is your ability to think about what's next and to put all of those things together in a way, right? The fifth piece is strategy.
Hmm.
Strategy is not hard, right? Like I'll go into, if I go back and think about all of the engagements that we have done over all of the years, I rarely find that people don't get it on the strategy level, right? Like, if think about it recently, in business, there's been this huge push for transformation from transactional or perpetual product sales into subscription as a service recurring revenue, right? On the services side, we figured that out a long time ago. On
Hmm.
the product side, that's been the phenomenon for the last, kind of started 15, 10 years ago with the advent of cloud technologies, and you would subscribe to them. But then when you kind of make that mainstream and you no longer buy anything, you subscribe to it. That's a big phenomenon. Everybody's heard that, right? Like if you go to a meeting of 1,000 people and you say, hey, think about the transition from product transaction to outcomes based on subscription recurring revenue. That's a smart thing. 990 of those people are going to look at you and go, uh-huh.
Hmm.
I've read the article. I understand the philosophy. I get it. How many businesses, especially small businesses in the technology industry, capture a dominant share of their top line revenue and their margin production from not just recurring services, but from subscription on recurring revenue on product. If you asked yourself that question, I would wager it's less than 15%
Hmm.
of our industry, right? Well, what explains the difference? Well, the difference between 90% of the people who understand it and 15% of the people who actually do it, that 75% of the people in between, it's a question of discipline.
Wow.
It's not rocket science. There are some things you need to figure out, just like with like your example with health related questions. There is some science. There are some things that you need to figure out, but that's not the hard part. The hard part's doing it again tomorrow
Hmm.
and the next day and putting up with the I have to change people's minds and I have to convince them to do it the way that I do it. You can call it discipline. There are books that have been written that refer to it as grit. There's
Hmm.
there's others that have been written that I think are fascinating that refer to it as mindset, and all of them are true. Right?
Hmm.
It's not about being the smartest guy in the room and having the answer that nobody else has. It's about figuring out how do you convince humans, whether that's this one human or a small group of five or six or an industry full of tens of thousands, how do you get the humans to actually do it?
Hmm. Well said. Well said. What motivates you, Ryan Morris? What motivates you?
That's a good question. I think so. I'm not motivated by the same thing that most brazen capitalists are, right? I want to be well rewarded. I want to make money, but that's not the central driving factor. I am motivated by the learning process, right?
Hmm.
When the aha moment, when I had that as a kid, I remember vividly sitting in math class in the sixth grade when they introduced algebra to us. And I am not going to lie, there were about 2 solid weeks at the beginning of that class that I was looking around at other people going, I can't possibly be the only one who doesn't understand this stuff. Like I'm looking around. These are people that I know. I've gone to school with them in my youth, and I'm looking around going, do you actually understand this? It was beyond my brain as a sixth grader, and then something happened and I don't know what it was. I cannot recall what the lesson was that I was taught, but I can remember where I was sitting, and I mean seriously in the pod room outside of my junior high school. I remember sitting in that room and something clicked,
Hmm.
and it was literally a physical rush, and it was. I remember being like buzzed, actually physically buzzed by that thing, and I was geeked on that stuff. It made sense, and I figured it out. And every time in my life, hard things click, boom, you get that same rush.
Hmm.
And so for me, internally, it's the aha moment. Externally, it is causing other people to have the aha moment. And when they go, oh my God, I've heard this before. You didn't say anything I'd never heard before, but
Hmm.
you said it in a way that made me go, boom, now I get it. Now it makes sense. And I can go do that thing, whether I am training, whether I am doing a keynote in front of 5,000 people, whether I am in a one on one with somebody in a consulting practice, whether it's business or sales or whatever, right? Everything we do in this world, if you already knew how to do it and you were already good at it, you don't need me.
Hmm.
Like that's you're good. Go and take over the world, right? That if there is something that you don't understand, something that you are not presently good at, at all, right? There has to be not just a learning process, but the clicking process, right? It has
Mm.
to lock in and you go, oh, now I get it. Now it makes sense to me. And I'm excited and I'm motivated and I will eventually need some remotivation, right? Because we all learn the same lessons over and over again. But there has to be that experience. That experience is euphoric in when it's done right. And when I do it, I feel the same thing. And doing that for other people, that is motivational.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, 'cause that's very noble. That's very, very cool. And how do you measure success, Ryan?
Um, you know what? The ultimate way that you measure success is the people that you teach, the people that you coach, go out and become wildly successful.
Mm.
And that's incredibly gratifying. Like there are people in this industry who have been students of mine in a workshop or have been clients of mine and training programs or consulting gigs, whatever. There are people out there who do big stuff, and when I see them stand up on a stage, I go, yeah, I knew that person when, and I taught them something, and that's phenomenally gratifying. Sometimes though that takes years. That's sometimes that's nowhere near rapid enough feedback to keep the motivation going. What keeps me going? Literally, if you break it down into the incremental milestones that you can measure more rapidly, that's good. I take it right down to the kind of micro level. The micro milestone is when people plug in,
Hmm.
right? Like I will, and sometimes I have been counseled by very wise people that I need to package that more effectively and
Hmm.
price it more effectively and actually get paid for that stuff. But what I find is I just like when so as a specific example, right? Like a vendor will hire me to come and speak at one of their events. I don't have the mental capacity to not make that as freaking awesome as I can possibly muster,
Mm.
right? Like I have to deliver to the best of my ability. And I have been told 1,000 times, like, whoa, dude, you were getting paid X for this thing, but you just delivered X times
Mm.
25. That was so much better than I expected. And I'm like, that's cool. A, I should have charged more. And B,
Mhm.
I don't know how to not do that because the way that I measure success, if you're in front of one person or if you're in front of 25 people, you can tell whether or not it's working,
Mm.
right? Like whether it's eye contact or body language or the feedback, you feel energy, right? You get that from people and that uh, factor when you're talking to somebody and they just get it and they're plugged in, that's seriously like drugs. That is
Mm.
incredibly compelling, and that's in the moment. That's how you can tell whether or not it's working. That's the most micro way to measure success, and then you have to translate that into, you know, did they hire you? Did they hire you again? did did they enjoy the process enough and get enough value that they brought you back again? And I will measure success not based on the gigs that I get, not based on the clients that I have, but it's based on the clients who come back.
Mm.
Because any of us can do the things that we do. Question is, when it was done, did you walk away and go, that was actually worth it?
Hmm.
I won't do that again.
Very, very cool. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed it. Tell us how we can get in touch with you. Your podcast, LinkedIn, website. How can anybody listening, get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So my own. So you find me on LinkedIn is probably the most universal way. Ryan Morris 303 is me on LinkedIn. You can go to my website. We are morrismp.com. Morris, M as in management, P as in partners.com. You can get me on email, Ryan Morris. Actually, I'm R Morris now. We updated our protocols because our stuff was getting too long. R Morris at Morris MP, and then podcasting world. I have a regular weekly broadcast that comes out called Killing It, and it's killing, not killing, killing it. And you can find us on any of your friendly podcast platforms. I also do a weekly podcast with an industry group that I've been working with for a long time called the Internet of Things Security Association, IOTSA, right? IOTSSA. And if you go to iotsa.com, you can find podcasts there, and we've done bundles of conversations with some incredibly smart people who teach me a lot about cybersecurity. And if you're not in the business of cybersecurity, that's not all it's about. So you might learn some stuff over there as well. I do. I find, I'm sure like you do, hosting a podcast, every single time I interview a super smart guy, I come out of that going, whoa, I
Mm.
didn't know that before. And now I'm better because I just hosted that person on my podcast. So I get smarter every single week as I talk to people who are way smarter than me.
As do I, as evident by this conversation. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Look forward to continuing the conversation, and we'll get to see each other soon. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on. Thanks everybody for listening in. Hopefully this was good use of your time. Let me know how we can keep the conversation going.
Sounds good, Ryan. Be well. I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Would you like to financially support the podcast? You can go to our Patreon site. Consider $5, $10, or $20 a month. There's all kind of plans that we have there. There's like a one-time payment. What is this podcast episode worth to you? $25, $50, $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000. You be the judge. You can go to our PayPal account to do that as well. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations.